Tonight, we journey into the darkest corners of human nature, where ordinary streets, quiet homes, and even the most familiar places hide unimaginable evil. These are true stories. Stories that will make you question who you can trust and how safe you really are. Are you ready to step into the shadows? The chilling silence of the Hinterkaifeck farm? It was a bitterly cold night in March 1922 when the residents of a small, isolated farm in Germany called Hinterkaifeck would meet a fate so horrifying it would haunt investigators for decades. Picture the scene: snow blanketing the ground in a perfect silent white, with the wind slicing through the gaps in the wooden walls of the farm. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind in the trees sounded louder than usual. Can you imagine standing there alone, hearing nothing but the wind and feeling like someone is watching? The Gruber family lived in that remote farmhouse. Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, her 2 children, and the maid. Days. In the days leading up to the tragedy, strange things began to happen. Footprints were discovered in the snow, leading to the house, but none leading away. Objects in the home seemed to move on their own. And Victoria reportedly heard strange noises in the attic, though the family dismissed them as animals. What would you have done if you were alone and you knew someone or something was in your house at night? On March 31st, neighbors grew increasingly concerned. No one came to fetch supplies. The animals in the barn were left unattended, their faint cries echoing through the cold air. Something was wrong, but what? When the police finally arrived, they found a scene that would shock even the most hardened officers. Every member of the Gruber family, plus their maid, had been murdered with a mattock, a farming tool, right inside their home. It wasn't just the killings, it was the eerie precision and brutality. The bodies were arranged unnaturally. Some had been moved after death. The killer had clearly spent time in the home, lingering, almost as if to torment the family further. What kind of person could do that? Could you imagine being in that room, discovering the aftermath? The air must have been thick with silence and fear. Even stranger, investigators could find no evidence of the killer leaving. No footprints in the snow outside the house. No signs of forced entry. How could someone commit such a crime and vanish without a trace? Is it someone the family knew, a neighbor, a former worker, or perhaps a vengeful stranger? Or could it have been something darker? Something that defies explanation? Theories abound. Some suggest it was a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, Victoria's former fiancé, who had been spurned. Others believe it could have been a thief who perhaps stumbled upon the family by chance, but nothing fits perfectly. Every theory has gaps, unanswered questions, and that's what makes Hinterkaifeck so terrifying. The mystery remains unsolved even today. And then there's the attic. Weeks before the murders, Victoria reportedly heard creaking and footsteps in the loft. She asked her mother, "Mom, is someone in the attic?" Imagine her fear hearing soft footsteps above you in the dead of night and knowing the house is supposed to be empty. What would you have done? Would you have investigated or stayed frozen in fear? After the murders, the farm was abandoned. Snow-covered and silent, it became a tomb. Even now, visitors to the area speak of hearing whispers, creaks, and shadows moving in the corner of their vision. Some claim that Hinterkaifeck is haunted, a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Would you dare to step inside, knowing what happened there? Would you spend a night in a house where nobody survived? Hinterkaifeck is more than a story of murder. It's a study in isolation, fear, and the unknown. It reminds us that evil can lurk in the most remote, seemingly peaceful places. And perhaps the most chilling question of all is this: if someone or something was watching, are they still out there, waiting? The Villisca Axe Murders, Iowa. 1912, it was a quiet summer evening in June 1912 in the small, sleepy town of Villisca, Iowa. The sun had set, leaving the streets empty and silent. Picture this: lanterns flickering in windows, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and the occasional whisper of a night breeze rustling through the trees. For most of the townspeople, it was an ordinary night until morning. The Moore family lived in a modest 2-story home at the corner of 8th and Jackson Streets. Josiah Moore, a well-respected businessman, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, along with 2 young boarders who lived with them, had gone to bed early, as they did every night. But the next day, something horrifying awaited the town. When neighbors knocked on the Moores' door the following morning, there was no answer. Something felt wrong. Doors were locked from the inside, windows shut, the home unusually quiet. Inside, investigators found a scene of unimaginable horror. Every member of the Moore family, along with the 2 children staying with them, had been brutally murdered with an axe. The attacks were methodical, but chilling in their violence. Blood coated the floors and furniture. Children had been struck in their beds, still clutching their favorite toys, eyes wide in silent terror. Can you picture that moment? Walking into a home that should feel safe, only to be confronted with such horror? How would you even begin to process it? What made the Villisca axe murders even more terrifying was the apparent absence of motive. Nothing of value had been stolen. The family was respected, well-liked, and there was no evidence of any prior disputes. Who could do this and why? The investigation was intense. Police interviewed countless suspects, traveling salesmen, strangers in town, even local residents with grievances. One man was accused, then released. Another confessed, only to recant later. Yet no one was ever convicted, and the murders remain unsolved to this day. Imagine the frustration of the investigators, knowing the murderer was likely still walking among them. Could it have been someone you knew, smiling at you on the street? Adding to the mystery were the small, eerie details left behind. The murderer had not left footprints in the soft dirt around the home, suggesting they either moved with extreme care or had intimate knowledge of the property. The bedrooms were locked from the inside, making the killer's exit nearly impossible to explain. And yet, by morning, the town was plunged into grief, fear, and suspicion. Locals claim that at night, if you pass by the Moore house, you can feel a heavy silence that presses against your chest. Some say you can still hear faint whispers or the creak of floorboards long abandoned. Would you dare to step inside that house, knowing what happened there? Could you spend a night in a place where innocence met such unspeakable violence? The Villisca axe murders leave questions that refuse to die. Why the Moore family, who was capable of committing such a crime and disappearing into the night? And most terrifying of all, could someone like that exist today, hiding in plain sight? Even more chilling, some investigators believe the killer may have returned to the town afterward, watching his life slowly resumed, smiling at the chaos left behind. How would you feel knowing that the person responsible could still be out there, unseen, blending into the crowd? The story of Villisca isn't just a historical crime, it's a reminder of the fragility of safety, of how quickly life can turn from ordinary to unspeakably horrific. And it forces us to confront a question that lingers long after the lights go out. What would you do if you realized that true evil might be living right next door? The Dyatlov Pass incident, Ural Mountains, Russia, 1959. It was the dead of winter in the remote Ural Mountains. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the jagged peaks and the skeletal trees dusted in frost. The air was sharp, biting at your skin with every breath. Imagine standing there, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant cracking of ice. Would you feel awe or a creeping sense of dread? 9 experienced hikers Igor Dyatlov and his group had set out on a challenging trek, confident in their skills. They were young, full of life and adventure, laughing as they carved their path through the snow. But the mountain doesn't forgive mistakes, and something on that cold slope would change their lives forever, and claim them all. The group made camp on the night of February 1st, 1959, pitching their tent on a slope known today as Dyatlov Pass. What they did next still baffles investigators. Sometime during the night, they tore open their tent from the inside and fled into the freezing darkness, inadequately dressed for the conditions. Imagine being in near total darkness, barefoot, some in only socks or thin clothing, with temperatures plunging far below freezing. What would drive you to leave a warm tent in such conditions? Panic? Terror? Something far worse? When search teams arrived days later, they found a scene of confusion and horror. Bodies were scattered across the snow. Some lay in positions suggesting they had tried to build fires. Others were found hours away, seemingly trying to climb back to shelter. Some had fractures and injuries so severe that they resembled car crash trauma, yet no external wounds explained it. Even stranger, one victim was missing her tongue, and traces of radiation were found on several of the bodies. Investigators were perplexed. Could an avalanche have caused this? Perhaps a sudden snow slab sent them fleeing in panic. But the slope was gentle, An avalanche severe enough to crush bones would have left clear evidence. Could secret military testing have been involved? UFOs. Something unknown, unseen, beyond explanation. Every theory comes with gap sand. That is what chills you most. The Ural night was merciless. Snow blinded the hikers. The cold numbed their senses. Imagine the terror of stumbling blindly through that storm, hearing only the wind and your own ragged breathing, unsure if you will ever see safety again. Would you have had the courage to keep moving, or would fear freeze you in place? Even more haunting are the questions left behind.
Why did they leave the tent in the first place?
What did they see that night that made them abandon safety in such a dangerous landscape? Some accounts suggest a strange orange glow in the sky. Others describe inexplicable sounds like a whistling or roaring coming from the mountainside. Could they have encountered something beyond human understanding, something that left their bodies mangled, their spirits terrified? Dayloff Pass remains a symbol of mystery. Hikers still visit the site, feeling the weight of the past, the icy wind carrying whispers of that night. Could you face the same desolate slope, knowing what happened there? Could you survive the terror of being alone in the wilderness with something unknown lurking nearby? The Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a story of frozen tragedy, it is a story of fear, uncertainty, and forces beyond explanation. And when you picture those 9 young hikers fleeing into the cold with panic in their eyes, you can't help but ask yourself, what would you do if the very world around you turned against you and nothing made sense? Isdal Woman, Norway, 1970. It was a cold, gray November day in Bergen, Norway, when hikers stumbled upon a scene that would perplex the world for decades. In a remote section of the Isedalen Valley, near the forested slopes and jagged cliffs, they found the charred remains of a woman. Smoke still hung faintly in the crisp air. The smell of burned clothing and hair clung to the trees. Can you picture yourself standing there, the silence pressing in, the cold biting at your fingers, staring at a body that had been consumed by fire, and knowing no one had any clue who she was? The woman became known simply as the Isdal Woman, but her identity was a puzzle no one could solve. Her belongings were burned, her fingerprints and teeth filed down. In her luggage, found in a nearby train station, were dozens of passports with different names, tickets to mysterious European cities, and coded notes written in a language no one could decipher. Who was she? What was she running from, and why? Police investigators pieced together what little evidence remained. She had traveled extensively, often staying in cheap hotels, moving from city to city in secrecy. Witnesses described her as cautious, meticulous, someone who avoided attention at all costs. She carried herself with a confidence that suggested she was used to danger, but danger of what kind? Espionage, organized crime, or something darker and more personal. Theories abound, but none fully explain her death. Some believe she was a spy, caught in a shadow war during the Cold War era, a woman who knew too much and was silenced. Others suggest a lover or acquaintance betrayed her, leaving her to die alone in the valley. Could it have been someone she trusted, someone who walked beside her for months without revealing their intentions? How would you feel knowing a stranger could decide your fate without warning? Even stranger are the details surrounding her death. She was found in a remote part of the valley, far from any roads or signs of civilization. It's almost as if she'd been placed there deliberately, the fire a final act to erase her identity. Yet traces of chemical accelerants were inconsistent with a simple accidental fire. Was she trying to destroy evidence of her life? Or was someone else trying to erase her entirely? Locals to this day speak of uneasy sensations near the Isdalan Valley. Fog drifts through the trees and hikers report hearing unexplained noises, footsteps, whispers, or the faint rustle of clothing where no one is present. Could it be the Isdal woman herself, leaving a lingering presence as a warning or a reminder of the unresolved mystery? Would you dare to walk those woods, knowing someone met such a tragic, enigmatic fate there? The Isdal woman challenges everything we think we know about identity, secrecy, and trust. She vanished into the shadows, and yet her story refuses to fade. The coded notes, the multiple identities, the careful secretive life she led all leave us with haunting questions. Who was she really, and what was she trying to hide? Could someone like her exist today, moving unseen among us, carrying secrets that could destroy lives? Her mystery remains unsolved, a cold, enigmatic case that continues to captivate investigators, historians, and true crime enthusiasts. and as the wind whistles through the Azalan Valley, it feels almost as if the woman herself is asking, what would you do if your life was hunted and the world knew more about you than anyone should? Echoes of evil, the modern cold case. It was a quiet town, not unlike any other tree-lined streets, neatly kept homes, children riding bicycles in the summer sun. But behind one ordinary-looking house, something dark was lurking. Imagine walking past a home like this and feeling a prickling sense of unease. Would you trust your instincts or dismiss it as paranoia? In 2008, investigators discovered a crime that sent chills through the community. A family living in near isolation at the edge of town was found dead under strangely familiar circumstances, their home undisturbed from the outside. No signs of forced entry, and bodies arranged in ways that suggested someone had lingered in the house after the murders. The victims had been attacked with blunt instruments, leaving behind both brutal force and eerie precision. The details were haunting. The parents were found in their beds, children nearby, and yet nothing was stolen. No money, no valuables, no apparent motive. Neighbors said they had noticed strange visitors at odd hours, shadows lingering near windows, and unexplainable noises echoing through the walls. Could you imagine living next to that house, knowing something unspeakable had occurred but having no answers? How would it change your sense of safety? Investigators combed the town for suspects, questioning every person who had ever interacted with the family. Friends, neighbors, even strangers passing through the trail led nowhere. Every clue seemed to vanish, as if someone had meticulously erased their tracks. And the chilling thought remained. The killer was likely still out there, blending into the crowd, smiling, invisible. This modern case shares eerie similarities with the historic tragedies of Hinterkaifeck and Villisca. The isolation, the precision, the lack of motivates, as if history itself was repeating, testing the limits of fear and human understanding. Could evil really be a timeless force, evolving but never dying, striking where we least expect it? What makes it more unnerving is the psychological tension it leaves behind. For weeks, neighbors reported strange lights flickering in the windows, faint footsteps on porches that had been empty for months, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Imagine going to sleep at night, doors locked, windows shuttered, and still feeling that someone or something was there, observing you. Could you sleep? Could you walk past that house during the day without a glance over your shoulder? To this day, the case remains unsolved. Forensic technology has advanced, yet no arrests have been made. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes, even in a world of cameras, DNA testing, and digital footprints, true darkness can evade capture. And the final question lingers, long after the story ends. Could such a killer be living among us now, invisible in our neighborhoods, patient, meticulous, waiting for the next moment to strike? Would you recognize the signs or ignore them until it's too late? This case, like Hinterkaifeck, Villisca, Dyatlov, and the Isdal woman, leaves a lasting impression. Fear isn't just about the act itself fits, about the unknown, the unexplained, the evil that hides just beyond our perception. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are those who wear a familiar face and walk beside us every day. The Axeman of New Orleans, 1918-19199 New Orleans, in 1918, was alive with jazz. The clatter of streetcars, the aroma of Creole cooking drifting through alleyways. But beneath the lively music and the laughter, a dark presence stalked the city. Known only as the Axeman, a murderer broke into homes at night, attacking families while they slept with axes stolen from the very houses they lived in. The city was gripped with fear, unsure who would be next, unsure if they could lock their doors and feel safe. The first attacks were brutal and precise. Families were struck in their sleep. Blood spattered furniture and floors, leaving behind a macabre signature. In some homes, the murderer left notes. One infamous letter, published in the local newspaper, taunted the residents, promising that he would spare anyone playing jazz music in their home. Imagine reading that, the words staring at you from the paper, knowing your survival depended on the music you chose. What would you play? Would you trust your instincts, or risk playing the wrong tune? Investigators were baffled. The Axeman left almost no clues. Sometimes he entered through doors that were securely locked. Sometimes he vanished without leaving footprints in the soft ground outside. Could it have been a neighbor? A traveling criminal? someone who knew the homes intimately. Every family became suspect in their own minds, wondering if their friends or neighbors might be capable of unimaginable violence. As the attacks continued, the city descended into paranoia. Some families slept with axes under their pillows. Others left music playing through the night, hoping the axeman's promise would protect them. Local churches and community halls held vigils, people whispering about what might come next. Could you live like that, never knowing if your home was truly safe? How would you cope with the constant fear that the next knock at the door could be your last? Despite intensive investigations, arrests, and public warnings, the Axeman was never caught. Letters continued, cryptic and mocking, making clear that he relished the terror he inspired. New Orleans would never forget that winter, where the rhythm of jazz became intertwined with fear, and where even the brightest streets could hide shadows of unspeakable evil. And perhaps the most chilling thought of all, the Axeman could have walked among the residents during the day, blending in, smiling, invisible until nightfall. Could someone like that exist today, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again? The Black Dahlia, Los Angeles, 1947, a city of dreams, glitz, and post-war optimism. Yet beneath the sunshine and glamour, shadows moved quietly through the streets. Elizabeth Short, a young woman of 22, arrived in Hollywood with hopes of stardom. She was ambitious, charming, and seemingly ordinary, but her life would intersect with something far darker than fame. On January 15, 1947, a delivery truck driver discovered Elizabeth's body in a vacant lot in the Leimert Park neighborhood. The scene was grotesque, her body cut in half at the waist, drained of blood, meticulously cleaned yet horrifyingly mutilated. The horror was compounded by the meticulous care with which her killer had carried out the act. Who could commit such violence and yet leave a work of morbid precision? Investigators descended upon the city, desperate for answers. But every lead only deepened the mystery. Elizabeth had been seen with a number of men in the days leading up to her death, yet none could be definitively linked to the crime. Hotel records, photographs, and eyewitness accounts painted fragments of a life, but no coherent picture emerged. She seemed to exist in shadows as much as in light, her movements just out of reach of those who wanted to protect her. The Black Dahlia case gripped the nation, partly because of the gruesome nature of the crime, partly because of Elizabeth's persona, young, ambitious, and tragically vulnerable. Newspapers splashed her image on front pages, sensationalizing the murder, but never revealing the truth. Could you imagine living in a city where such a crime could occur, knowing someone capable of this might still be walking the same streets? The details of the murder were horrifying yet strangely precise. The killer had drained her blood, perhaps to conceal evidence, perhaps for some other reason lost to history. The body had been posed, arms outstretched, eyes staring blankly at the sky. A silent, haunting tableau. Investigators speculated endlessly ritualistic killing, revenge, random violence. Each theory carried its own horrors. How would you react if faced with such incomprehensible brutality? Could your mind accept a crime so deliberate, yet so utterly senseless? Many suspects emerged. Acquaintances, strangers, men seen with her shortly before her death. Some confessed, others recanted, but none were ever convicted. Elizabeth's killer had vanished, leaving an unsolved case that would haunt Los Angeles and the world for decades. The story of Elizabeth Short reminds us that danger often hides behind the familiar, that the pursuit of dreams can collide with unimaginable evil. Some locals claim that even today, walking past the vacant lots and alleys of mid-century Los Angeles, they can feel a lingering unease, as if the Black Dahlia herself is still searching for justice. And here's the chilling question: could someone capable of such calculated violence still walk among us today? Hiding in plain sight, leaving trails that vanish just as quickly as they appear? Would you recognize the signs, or dismiss them until it was too late? The Black Dahlia case is more than a murder. It is a cautionary tale about vulnerability, ambition, and the darkness that can exist just beneath the surface of ordinary life. It's a story that continues to fascinate, horrify, and haunt, reminding us that sometimes evil wears a familiar face, and the shadows of history are never truly gone. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey. It was Christmas night in 1996 in Boulder, Colorado, a town blanketed in snow, decorated with festive lights and filled with the sound of family laughter. But in the Ramsey home, something had gone terribly wrong. Imagine the quiet calm of a winter night suddenly pierced by the unknown. How safe would you feel, even in the warmth of your own home? 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey, a child beauty pageant star, was found murdered in her family's basement the next morning. A ransom note, eerily long and demanding, had been left on the kitchen counter, claiming she had been kidnapped and threatening harm if the family did not comply. But the story didn't add up. Investigators quickly realized that the murder had likely occurred inside the home, making the claim of an external kidnapping highly suspicious. The details were haunting. JonBenét was found wrapped in a blanket, her tiny body lifeless. The basement, usually a place of safety or play, had become a stage for a nightmare. Imagine descending those stairs, expecting to find a sleeping child, only to discover the unspeakable. Could you even comprehend such horror? What would you do in that instant? The investigation spiraled into one of the most high-profile and controversial cases in American history. Every family member was scrutinized. Friends and neighbors questioned. Strangers investigated, yet no one was ever charged. The lack of resolution, the endless speculation, and the media frenzy compounded the tragedy, leaving the town and the nation in collective shock. What made the case even more perplexing were the small, inexplicable details. The ransom note, unusually long and written in a mix of upper and lowercase letters, seemed almost staged. Some suggested it was written by someone familiar with the family. Others believed it was meant to mislead investigators entirely. Could it have been a stranger? Someone closer? Someone whose face you might recognize every day and never suspect? The psychological toll of the case extended far beyond the immediate family. Parents across the country wondered, could this happen in my home? How safe is my child in the very place we expect protection? Could the most ordinary of nights turn into a waking nightmare? Even decades later, theories abound. Was it a tragic accident? A family dispute gone horribly wrong? A meticulously planned act of violence by a stranger? No explanation fits perfectly, and that uncertainty is part of what keeps this story alive, haunting, and terrifying. And the most chilling thought of all, whatever happened that night, the truth may never be known. A killer, whether stranger or acquaintance, could have walked away, blending into the crowd, leaving only questions, speculation, and an unshakable sense of dread behind. Could someone like that exist among us today? Could the ordinary masks we all wear hide unimaginable darkness? JonBenét Ramsey's story is a reminder that horror can strike in the most familiar places, that innocence can be shattered in moments, and that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are those that remain unsolved. It forces us to ask, if evil can hide in plain sight, how well do you really know the people around you? The murder of Helle Crafts. It was a bitter winter in Connecticut in 1986. When the snow lay thick on the ground and the air was sharp with cold. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, life appeared ordinary. But beneath the calm surface, darkness had taken root. Helle Crafts, a flight attendant known for her warm smile and quiet demeanor, had vanished without a trace. Imagine the last time someone saw her happy, going about her routine, and then suddenly, nothing. How would you feel if someone close to you disappeared without warning? At first, police believed she had simply gone missing, a case of a woman leaving on her own. But suspicions soon turned to her husband, Richard Crafts, known to be controlling and volatile. His behavior after Helle's disappearance raised red flags. He claimed ignorance, but neighbors and coworkers began whispering. Something wasn't right. Could someone you trusted most, someone you shared a life with, be capable of unthinkable violence? The investigation took a gruesome turn when forensic evidence revealed the horrifying truth. Helle Crafts had been murdered and her body destroyed in a wood chipper. A brutal attempt to erase her existence. Investigators painstakingly reconstructed the crime, piecing together fragments of bone, tissue, and hair to prove that she had been killed and disposed of in the most chilling way imaginable. Imagine seeing the pieces of a person reduced to mere fragments. How would that affect your sense of humanity? The details of the crime were meticulous and terrifying. Richard had planned it carefully. Using his knowledge of Helle as habits and the isolated areas near their home to carry out the murder, yet even in the act some things remained shocking. Forensic scientists had to rely on the smallest clues to identify her remains, demonstrating the painstaking and horrifying reality of trying to uncover truth from a scene designed to conceal it. Could you imagine the patience and the cold calculation needed to commit such a crime? This case forced investigators and the public to confront unsettling questions about trust, marriage, and the darkness that can hide behind ordinary lives. How well do we truly know the people closest to us? Could the person standing beside you at the dinner table be capable of such unthinkable evil? Helle Crafts' murder was not just about the act itself. It was about the deception, the manipulation, and the terrifying intimacy of betrayal. Even decades later, the case remains a cautionary tale. Helle's story reminds us that evil is not always distant or abstract. It can be personal, hidden in plain sight, and striking where we feel safest. And the haunting question lingers. If someone can hide such darkness behind the mask of everyday life, how many Helle Crafts are out there whose stories we may never know? Helle Crafts' murder is more than a crime. It is a chilling lesson in human behavior, in the consequences of control and obsession, and in the terrifying reality that some crimes are committed so deliberately that even science struggles to bring justice. And as the wind whistles through the snow-covered streets of Connecticut, one cannot help but ask, could this darkness exist next door, waiting silently, unnoticed, until the right moment? The modern Hinterkaifeck Echo, it was a quiet town in rural America. Much like any other tree-lined streets, children playing in yards, neighbors exchanging friendly waves. Yet in one secluded house at the edge of town, something dark was brewing. The home appeared ordinary, well-kept, a place of warmth and safety, but beneath the surface, terror had already arrived. Imagine walking past this house at dusk, sensing something off, feeling your heartbeat quicken. Would you investigate or pretend nothing was wrong? The family living there had moved in a few years earlier, seeking peace away from city life. They were well-liked, ordinary people living ordinary lives. But one day, the unthinkable happened. When neighbors noticed the family hadn't been seen for days, and the mail piled up untouched, someone finally dared to check. Inside, investigators found a scene eerily reminiscent of Hinterkaifeck, or Villisca. The family brutally murdered, bodies arranged in strange, deliberate positions, the house undisturbed from the outside, as if the killer had entered and left without leaving a trace. There was no robbery, no obvious motive. It's only the chilling signs of someone who had lingered inside the home, watching, waiting, and choosing exactly how and when to strike. Could you imagine being in a home like that, hearing the creak of the floor, knowing someone unseen was observing you? Would you run, hide, or freeze in fear? Neighbors came forward with strange reports, lights flickering at odd hours, shadows moving across windows when no one should have been home, faint sounds of footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Some swore they saw a figure in the woods behind the house late at night, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. Could evil hide that icily blending into familiar surroundings? Investigators were baffled. Despite modern forensic technology, DNA testing, surveillance footage, digital tracking, there were no conclusive leads. Every clue seemed to vanish, every potential suspect faded into nothing, and the most terrifying thought remained. The killer was likely still out there, watching, patient, waiting for the next opportunity. The parallels to historic tragedies were uncanny. Hinterkaifeck, Villisca, and even modern isolated murders shared a similar pattern: isolation, brutality, and an almost ritualistic approach to the crime. It was as if certain types of evil repeated across generations, evolving but never dying. Could history itself be a warning, showing that some forms of violence refuse to stay buried? This modern cold case challenges our assumptions about safety, community, and trust. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How well do we know our neighbors? How well do we know our friends, or even our family? Could someone capable of unthinkable evil be walking among us today, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The town remains haunted by the memory of the murders. Locals speak in hushed tones, warning children not to wander alone after dark, telling visitors to avoid the edge of the woods where shadows move too easily. And sometimes when the wind winds through the trees, it almost sounds like whispers of the past echoes of families who vanished too soon. Reminders that even in a modern world, darkness can be patient, meticulous, and terrifyingly invisible. This final story, like Hinterkaifeck, Villisca, and the others, leaves us with one inescapable thought. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks among us silently, waiting for the right moment. And the most terrifying question of all remains, could it be here now? Could it be next door? Could it be watching, The murder of Kitty Genovese, New York, 1964. It was a warm spring evening in Queens, New York. Streets buzzed with the faint hum of traffic, and apartment windows glowed with domestic light. But in a dimly lit courtyard, Kitty Genovese, a young woman returning home from work, was brutally attacked. The horror wasn't just the murder, it was the apparent indifference of those nearby. Accounts suggest that dozens of neighbors may have heard her screams and yet did nothing, frozen in fear or confusion. Imagine standing on your balcony hearing cries for help. Would you act? Would you assume someone else had already called? The story shocked the world and forced society to ask, when confronted with danger, how icily can humanity fail? Kitty's death became a symbol of urban apathy. But beneath the headlines was a real, personal tragedy. A young woman taken violently, leaving unanswered questions and grief that would haunt her family forever. How would you feel knowing your cries could go unheard? Could you survive the aftermath, carrying the knowledge of what the world ignored? The Cleveland Torso murders Cleveland, 1930s Cleveland, Ohio, in the 1930s, was a city scarred by the Great Depression, factories churning smoke into the sky. But amid the struggles of daily life, a serial killer roamed the streets, dismembering victims in ways that made the city shiver. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run left bodies without heads, arms, or legs, and often left them in abandoned lots. Police struggled to identify the victims, many of whom were homeless or marginalized. The killer was never caught, leaving the city in fear. Could you imagine walking past a dark alley and knowing a murderer had recently struck there? How safe would you feel in your own neighborhood? This case remains one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. A reminder that violence doesn't always strike randomly. It can prey on society's most vulnerable and vanish without trace. The murder of Evelyn McHale, the most beautiful suicide, New York. 1947. It was a spring morning in Manhattan when a shocking scene unfolded. Evelyn McHale, a young woman, had jumped from the 86th floor of the Empire State Building. She landed on a limousine below, and photographs taken by a bystander captured the surreal stillness of her body poised, almost serene. In contrast to the violence of the fall, her death was ruled a suicide, but the haunting beauty of the image made it legendary. It forces us to ask, what unseen despair could drive someone to such an extreme act? Could you ever imagine someone so full of life one moment and gone the next? The story reminds us of the hidden struggles people carry, often invisible to the world around them. The murder of Jean Clary, Pennsylvania, 1986. On a college campus in Pennsylvania, a young student, Jean Clary, was brutally attacked in her dorm room. Her death sparked a national outcry and became a catalyst for the Clary Act, requiring universities to report campus crimes. Jean had been a typical college student, navigating friendships, classes, and dorm life. But in one violent night, her life was taken, and the campus was left reeling. The tragedy highlighted the vulnerability, even in places we assume are safe. And it forced the world to ask, how much trust can we place in institutions to protect us? How would you feel if someone you knew was harmed where safety should have been guaranteed? The murder of James Bulger, Liverpool, 1993. Liverpool, England, in 1993, was shocked by a crime that defied imagination.
Out.
Two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, abducted and murdered 2-year-old James Bulger from a shopping mall. The city was horrified, and the world watched as the details emerged. The child was led away, beaten, and killed in a case that challenged perceptions of innocence and evil. Imagine walking through a crowded mall and seeing a small child disappear. How would you react? The crime sparked a debate about childhood, morality, and the nature of evil. It remains one of the most haunting and disturbing cases in modern British history, forcing us to confront the terrifying reality that violence can emerge even in the most unexpected forms. The disappearance of Maura Murray. It was February 9th, 2004, a bitter winter night in New Hampshire. Snow lay thick on the ground, wind howling through the bare trees like whispers from another world. The road was icy and desolate, stretching for miles through the forested hills. Few cars traveled this remote stretch, and even fewer people knew the name of the road, Route 112. Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, had just called her professors to explain she wouldn't be in class. She had packed her car with necessities, withdrawn money from the bank, and seemingly set off without telling her family where she was going. The questions start immediately. Why leave without notice? Was it a sudden decision, a calculated plan, or something else entirely? Shortly afterward, witnesses reported seeing her car crash into a snowbank. She appeared calm, almost collected, speaking to passersby and leaving her vehicle in a curious manner. Imagine standing there in the dark, the cold biting your skin, watching a young woman disappear into the shadows of the snowy forest. What would you do? Would you call for help or trust that she knew what she was doing? Search parties were dispatched, but the terrain was unforgiving. Dense forests, frozen rivers, and miles of snow made every step perilous. Dogs tracked scents, helicopters combed the area, yet Maura seemed to vanish completely. Her car remained, but she left no footprints, no clues, nothing but the echo of a presence now gone. Could you imagine searching frantically in that cold, dark wilderness, knowing that every minute counted and yet finding nothing? Theories began to swirl. Had she gotten lost in the woods and succumbed to the freezing temperatures? Had someone seen her, abducted her, and taken her out of sight? Some speculated she had staged her disappearance intentionally. Could a young woman vanish so completely on her own? Or was something far darker at play? Witnesses who passed by the scene recalled strange details. Her calm demeanor despite the crash, the odd way she seemed to interact with them, the precise packing of her car, the absence of panic. It suggested preparation or perhaps a mind racing with fear. Imagine being a stranger watching her in that moment. Would you trust your instincts, or would the scene seem ordinary enough to pass by? Family and friends launched their own searches, distributing flyers and pleading with the public for any information. Online communities formed, sharing theories, retracing her last steps, and scanning the area through every available lens maps, satellite imagery, and eyewitness accounts. Yet each lead seemed to dissolve into nothing, leaving only questions and haunting uncertainty. What makes the disappearance especially chilling is its isolation. Route 112 is a back road, far from towns, far from surveillance, far from the comfort of other humans. If danger lurked, there was no one to intervene. If she had wandered into the forest, the cold could kill within hours. Could anyone survive in that wilderness alone at night? Could you make it through the snow, wind, and darkness without leaving a trace? Even years later, Maura Murray's disappearance remains unsolved. People continue to search, theorize, and debate, but the forest keeps its secrets. Some hikers report seeing strange figures or hearing unexplained noises along that stretch of road. Could it be Maura or someone else entirely? And the most haunting question of all, what happened to her after that night? Did she meet foul play? Did she vanish intentionally to start a new life? Or was it the wilderness itself that claimed her? Every detail of the case is a reminder of how fragile life can be when the ordinary suddenly gives way to the unknown. If you were driving that road alone, in the dead of winter, and saw a lone figure standing beside a car in the snow, would you stop? Would you help? Or fear for your own safety? Could you imagine the choices that might determine whether someone lives or disappears without a trace? Maura Murray's story is more than a disappearance. It is a chilling exploration of isolation, risk, and the unknowable forces that can intervene in a single moment. And as the wind winds through the trees along Route 112, it's almost as if the forest itself is whispering, keeping its secrets carefully, leaving us to wonder, what really happened to Maura Murray that February night? And is she still out there somewhere, waiting to be found? The murder of Sharon Tate. It was August 8th, 1969, a warm, clear night in Los Angeles. The city shimmered with the glow of streetlights and the distant buzz of traffic, alive with the energy of youth, music, and the promise of dreams fulfilled. Hollywood was a place where ambition and glamour intersected, but that night, the promise of starlight would collide with unimaginable horror. Sharon Tate, a rising actress, was 8 months pregnant, living in a modern hilltop villa with her husband, director Roman Polanski. Inside, the home was filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft glow of lamps reflecting off polished surfaces. Imagine walking through that home, hearing the calm murmur of a domestic evening, feeling the comfort of safety. Could you have imagined that the darkness was about to descend? Shortly after midnight, a group of intruders, followers of Charles Manson, entered the house. Their purpose was not robbery, not revenge, but ideology twisted into madness, a plan to spread fear through ritualistic violence. The family and guests were attacked with knives and blunt objects, terror filling the air. Can you hear the echoes of screams bouncing off the walls? Imagine the panic, the helplessness, the desperate attempts to protect oneself and loved ones. How would you react if evil arrived without warning, uninvited, and utterly unstoppable? The crime scene was surreal. Sharon, once radiant and full of life, lay lifeless, her pregnancy a silent testament to innocence lost. The others in the house suffered the same fate, shocking and chaotic. Investigators later described the scene as ritualistic, almost theatrical in its horror, a deliberate message carved into the night itself. Could you stand there, in the aftermath, feeling both grief and disbelief, staring at the brutality left behind? The city reacted in shock. Los Angeles, a place used to crime, had never witnessed anything quite like this. The Manson family's actions shattered the sense of safety, turning the glamorous hills into a landscape of fear. How would you feel walking past the villa in the days after, knowing what had happened inside? Could you sleep at night knowing such darkness had touched your neighborhood? Investigators painstakingly pieced together the events. They discovered the killer's methods, their connections to Charles Manson, and the motives behind the seemingly senseless violence. Yet despite knowing the perpetrators, the horror lingered far beyond the legal process. The story remained etched into the collective consciousness, a reminder that evil does not always announce itself and can strike in the most familiar, seemingly safe places. What makes Sharon Tate's murder particularly haunting is the contrast, the light and warmth of life interrupted by calculated, brutal evil. The act was not only violent but symbolic, an attempt to terrorize an entire city. Imagine the weight of knowing someone could commit such acts without remorse. Could you ever feel safe again in your own home or in the world around you? Even decades later, the murder remains a cultural touchstone, a case studied for its psychological, social, and historical impact. The Manson family's influence, the fear they instilled, and the innocence lost that night continue to haunt historians, filmmakers, and true crime enthusiasts. And as the hills of Los Angeles shimmer under the California sun, one can almost feel the echo of that night, the lingering terror of what humans are capable of when driven by fanaticism and obsession. The story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. Evil can strike anywhere, even in places of comfort and love. It asks the audience to imagine themselves in Sharon's place, to consider how fragile safety can be, and how swiftly life can be transformed by darkness. Could you have survived that night? Could you have protected someone you loved? And most chillingly, what would you do if you realized that horror had arrived at your doorstep, unannounced and unstoppable? Sharon Tate's murder is more than history. It is a lesson, a caution, and a haunting reminder that the brightest lights can be extinguished in an instant, leaving shadows that linger for generations. The Green River Killer. It was the early 1980s, and the rain-soaked streets of Washington state carried a quiet unease. The city of Seattle and its surrounding towns seemed ordinary on the surface, office workers hurrying under umbrellas, children splashing in puddles, the rhythmic hum of traffic. But underneath this veneer of normalcy, a predator was stalking, striking at society's most vulnerable. Gary Ridgway, later known as the Green River Killer, began targeting women, many of them involved in prostitution or struggling with addiction. He was meticulous, patient, and methodical, choosing victims carefully and often leaving their bodies in remote areas along the Green River. Imagine walking near that riverbank on a misty evening, hearing the soft ripple of water and thinking it's safe. Could you sense the danger lurking nearby, hidden among the reeds and fog? The first victims were found partially clothed, discarded in the brush, their lives brutally ended. The city initially treated the cases as isolated incidents, but patterns emerged. Investigators noticed similar methods, locations, and victim profiles, signaling the presence of a serial killer. Yet despite the evidence, Ridgway remained free, blending into communities. Driving past homes where investigators combed for clues, invisible in plain sight. For years, police pursued leads, interviewed suspects, and followed every thread, but Ridgway's cunning allowed him to evade capture. His victims were vulnerable, voiceless in a system that often ignored them. Imagine the fear of walking those streets, knowing a predator could strike anyone, and that the very people tasked with protecting you were still piecing together clues. How would it feel to be constantly aware that danger could appear around any corner? Ridgway's methods were chillingly calculated. He often lured women into his car, gained their trust, and then murdered them in isolated locations. He sometimes returned to dump the bodies, ensuring they were hidden from discovery for as long as possible. Could someone so methodical exist next door, smiling, working, and living among ordinary people while hiding unimaginable evil? The Green River killings sparked one of the largest investigations in American history. For decades, law enforcement collected evidence, tracked patterns, and interviewed countless witnesses. Yet each year that passed without a capture intensified the terror for the community. Every missing person, every reported sighting, became a potential clue war, a warning that the killer was still out there, patient and calculating. In 2001, DNA evidence finally led to Ridgway's arrest. Revealing the horrifying truth, he had murdered at least 49 women, though he later confessed to many more. The investigation unveiled not just his crimes, but the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed him to continue for so long. Imagine the relief, the horror, and the grief mixed together as the city learned the full extent of the tragedy. Could such evil go unnoticed in our own communities, waiting silently for years? The story of the Green River Killer is more than a chronicle of murders. It is a lesson in vigilance, trust, and the fragility of human safety. It forces us to consider uncomfortable questions. How well do we know our neighbors? How well do we protect those society often overlooks? And most terrifyingly, could someone like Ridgway be operating unseen today, blending into the ordinary while carrying out the unthinkable? Even now, decades later, walking along the Green River, the mist rising from the water, one can almost feel the shadows of the past. The leaves rustle, the water ripples, and the echoes of the victims' lives linger in the silence. The Green River Killer reminds us that evil can be patient, invisible, and horrifyingly meticulous, and that the most ordinary places can hide unimaginable darkness. The murder of Lucie Blackman, it was July 2000. Tokyo, Japan, glimmered with the energy of a bustling metropolis. Neon lights reflected off rain-slicked streets, trains rumbled underground, and people moved quickly through the urban maze, each absorbed in their own lives. Amid this vibrancy, a young British woman named Lucie Blackman arrived. Full of excitement and adventure, seeking work and experience in a foreign country, Lucie, 21 years old, had come to Tokyo for opportunities in hospitality, working in bars and restaurants. She was independent, friendly, and eager to embrace the culture around her. Imagine the thrill of exploring a city so alive, so different from your hometown. Every street corner a discovery, every alley a story waiting to be told. But in Lucie's case, the city's energy concealed lurking danger. Could you feel the excitement and unease coexisting in a new place where language, culture, and trust are unfamiliar? One night, Lucie met a man named Joji Obara, a wealthy and seemingly charming individual who frequented Tokyo's nightlife. He invited her into his world, promising opportunity and protection. But behind his facade was a calculating predator, someone skilled at manipulating trust and concealing violent intent. Imagine the subtle fear creeping into Lucie's mind as she navigated this new relationship. The small instincts whispering caution that she may have dismissed in hope and excitement. Could you recognize the warning signs if someone close to you had hidden motives? Over several days, Lucie disappeared from the public eye. Her employer grew concerned. Friends searched, but initial inquiries revealed little. Then horrifying truths emerged. Joji Obara had kidnapped and murdered her, attempting to conceal the crime with shocking methods. Investigators discovered evidence of manipulation, abuse, and attempts to destroy the body. The precision with which he tried to erase Lucie's existence made the crime all the more chilling. How carefully evil can plan, and how easily appearances can deceive. The investigation was complex. Japan's legal system faced pressure from both domestic and international communities. Lucie's family, thousands of miles away, agonized over news reports, desperate for clarity. Imagine their anguish, the helplessness, the waiting, the fear that answers might never come. Could you endure the uncertainty of not knowing whether justice would ever reach the one you loved most? Lucie's story is not just a tale of murder. It is a cautionary lesson about vulnerability in unfamiliar environments, about the dangers of misplaced trust, and about the hidden darkness that can exist behind charming facades. Imagine walking the streets of Tokyo at night after learning her story. Could you feel the same safety as before? Or would every shadow, every alleyway, carry the memory of her fate? Even after Obara's arrest and trial, questions linger. How many others might have been victims of similar deception? How many dangers hide behind smiles, wealth, or authority? And for Lucie herself, whose life was stolen in a foreign city. The most chilling thought remains: how fragile life can be when innocence, curiosity, and trust collide with calculated evil. Lucie Blackman's murder is a haunting reminder that danger is not always obvious, that predators can hide in plain sight, and that tragedy can strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. And as Tokyo's neon lights continue to glow, one cannot help but feel the shadow of that night a young woman's life taken, leaving questions, fear, and lessons that still resonate decades later. The murder of Elisa Lam. It was January 26, 2013, in downtown Los Angeles. The city hummed with life, traffic lights blinking, street vendors calling out, and the distant rumble of trains beneath the streets. But in the shadowed corridors of the Cecil Hotel, a historic building with a reputation for misfortune, something sinister was unfolding. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student, had been traveling alone, exploring the city, documenting her adventures. She was bright, curious, and independent. Imagine her navigating the dark hallways of the Cecil, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her, unaware of the unseen threats lurking in the building's corners. Could you feel the thrill of adventure mingled with the unease of the unknown? Days passed and Eliza vanished. Staff and friends grew concerned. Then, the eerie elevator footage surfaced, capturing her acting strangely, pressing multiple buttons, peering into corners, stepping in and out as though unseen eyes were watching her. The video spread across the internet, leaving millions bewildered. What could explain her behavior? Was it fear, confusion, or something far more disturbing? Imagine watching this footage and wondering, what would I do if I were trapped in that situation alone and feeling that something is terribly wrong? Her disappearance prompted a massive investigation. Guests and staff were questioned, her hotel room was searched, but nothing seemed to explain where she had gone. Then, in a shocking turn, her body was discovered in a rooftop water tank, hidden from view. How could someone end up there unnoticed? How had she accessed the tank, and why? The questions multiplied, each more chilling than the last. The Cecil Hotel itself added to the mystery. Built in 1924, it had a notorious history. Previous suicides, murders, and stories of dark occurrences. Walking those halls, one could almost feel the weight of the past pressing in, as if the building itself held memories of tragedy. Could the environment amplify fear, confusion, and danger? Could a place have a presence that seems almost alive? Autopsy reports ruled her death an accidental drowning, though the circumstances remained highly suspicious. Some speculated about mental health issues, others whispered about foul play. Every theory seemed plausible and yet incomplete, leaving the case shrouded in ambiguity and unease. Imagine living in a world where someone can vanish in broad daylight, only to be found in a place that seems physically impossible to reach. How would you trust your instincts, your surroundings, your safety? Elisa Lam's story became a global phenomenon, sparking documentaries, podcasts, and endless speculation online. It forces the audience to confront uncomfortable questions. How vulnerable are we in unfamiliar environments? How easily can reality seem distorted when fear and isolation set in? Could this happen to anyone, anywhere, under the right or wrong circumstances? Even today, the image of Elisa's frantic elevator movements, the shadowed corridors of the Cecil, and the mystery of the rooftop tanks linger. Her story is a chilling reminder that danger does not always announce itself, that tragedy can occur quietly and visibly, and that some mysteries may never be fully solved. And as the wind whistles through the neglected corners of that old hotel, one can almost feel the echo of her final moments, leaving an unsettling question for us all. If Elisa Lam could vanish in a city of millions, could it happen to you? Could it happen right now? just out of sight? What would you do if this happened to someone you loved? Could evil walk among us unseen, waiting for the perfect moment? Do you trust the people closest to you, or fear that appearances deceive? Tonight, we've walked the streets, forests, and halls where darkness hides. We've met those lost, those terrorized, and those who vanished without a trace. And yet, perhaps the most terrifying lesson is this: evil does not always announce itself. It waits, quietly, patiently, among us. How safe are you really? In your home, on your streets, or in your own mind?